Innovation is in our veins. Soon the whole world will know our names. Sharing our knowledge and freedom reign. We here for the people, you know it's our way. Setting foundations is part of the dream. It doesn't matter if you're new to the game. Listen up now, cause we all gonna say, elevate, 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 higher, elevate, 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 higher. We gon' rise up, we all gon' shine. Work through adversity, stay on the grind. Elevate, elevate, this is our time. Elevate, elevate.
Welcome to the Elevate Podcast, everyone. It's so great to have you all on one more time. It's your boy Josh.
And Reg.
And we're grateful to be back on with you yet again. Well, Reg is out here and living his best life because he's just working away. So we'll be doing this virtually. I am still here in studio, and Reg is in New Brunswick making things happen. And so we're happy to have him. We got a lot to get into today. Well, first, we will be having the Hill Times reporter, Stuart Benson, on with us to discuss the foreign interference inquiry and the registry that dropped today, as well. We'll be talking about, from his perspective, what the heck happened in question period last week. As well, additionally, we'll be talking about just the chaotic nature of what's happening in politics at the moment. We're just doing a whole catch-all segment of all the craziness that's happening in federal politics for our first segment today, which we look forward to getting into. And as well, we learned there's this thing called the departure tax, where the government wants to take your money if you want to leave the country, which we'll be getting into. And then last but not least, that freaking Canadian military logo. What happened there? We're touching on all of it today. Reg, how you feeling, big dog?
Doing good. So as you mentioned, I'm in New Brunswick, in Fredericton, the capital of New Brunswick. It's actually really pretty. I shouldn't say it like that. It's very pretty. But I'm here for the Canadian National Evaluation Conference here. So they've got people from all over Canada here and just kind of talking about best practices in that. And that's kind of my background. And it's been a lot of fun and a lot of learning and a lot of networking. So my extroverted self is just, like you said, living my best life with this. But I am so excited to get into our first segment, and I think everybody's going to love it because it's just a hot mess. And when is it not? But I will say, like, it's extra spicy right now. So I'm excited for that. So I'm feeling good because of my conference. And I'm feeling good because this first segment is going to be fun. How are you feeling?
I am feeling very good. I think people are, I know what people are thinking. I know what they're feeling. And don't worry, I'm not going to trudge into any sports talk to start the show. I'm not going to talk any details. All I'll say is I told you so. But we will move on and from there. Anyone who follows me personally on the socials knows exactly how I feel and what I said, and we'll leave it at that. And it expires after 24 hours, so you'll never know. But it was a fun time, and I know that our Leaf listeners literally have been commenting on our videos and as well as messaging us personally, telling us to screw off. And I say, well, the only person who should be screwing off is, well, you, because you need to stop watching that team until they fix some stuff over there. Keefe doesn't look like he's even going to get fired after this, which is crazy. I'm not getting into it. It's crazy. Okay, what's going on here? So let's start off with this, Reg. Jagmeet Singh getting in front of a camera. And he's like, hey, Pierre, I don't like you, and I don't like what you're about, so I'm laying down the gauntlet on our policies that we're introducing here. You better get with it or get going. Reg, what you see in there when you saw this? Obviously, that's not exactly what he said, but that was the tone that was taken with this video.
Yeah, well, let's just watch it for a quick second here.
48 hours. Pierre, I'm giving you 48 hours to decide. Because women have worked way too hard to see their rights rolled back. So you have 2 days to decide whether you're going to stop blocking our attempt to bring in free birth control for women, or New Democrats will force through that legislation whether you want it or not. Either way, New Democrats will show you can't mess with women's rights in Canada.
As you saw there, like Jagmeet Singh coming out, I'm super tough, I'm super strong, look at me, Pierre can suck it, I'm so great, and, we're going to stop him from basically taking away the rights of women and see how he's trying to do that, but we're not going to let him. And then I love how he throws in the middle there. He's like, but, we kind of have this coalition with the conservative or with the liberals, so it doesn't really matter whether or not Pierre supports us. But, just so you know, it was like, so what is this? It was the dumbest. It's like, saying like, oh, I'm going to go play the lottery and I might win when you have the winning numbers already. Like, you know what I mean? It's just dumb. And all this kind of stems from basically, back a month ago, we had the conservative health critic basically go before the House and say, we need to, basically say that this is not going to get a second reading because it doesn't deserve it. We don't need to do this. This is a waste of money. We already have so many people who have their diabetes and their birth control covered right now. I can't remember the exact percentage, but I know it's over 80% of people have that. We can find that stat later if we need to, if somebody calls us on it, but I know that it's that high or higher. And so they're just like, this is something that's like a non-issue. Like, we need to really focus on other things. And so they really call out the fact that they're like, this is also just a costly program that's not going to make things better. And they actually just say that, like, it's not going to address the healthcare crisis that we have. And we really need to be focusing on other things and not being, creating a new form of bureaucracy. And the NDPs were like, you're only saying that because you hate women. And the Conservatives are like, oh God, like, nope, that's not it at all. So yeah, as you saw, Jagmeet gets out there and he's like, yep, we're gonna stick it to Pierre. And so then today, one of the NDP MPs, Julian, decides that he's going to try and withdraw Ellis's attempt. So Ellis is the Conservative member, to withdraw his attempt to halt C-64. But all the other MPs were like, nah, we're not going to do that. So it went nowhere. And so, of course, Jagmeet gets back on social media and he's like criticizing Pierre. And he's like, well, we're going to do it anyway, even though the Conservatives hate women. And that's just been the rhetoric. And I just like, are women actually going to like fall for that? Because I don't think they are. I don't think Canada's going to be like, yeah, Jagmeet, you really got our back here. I don't see it. Maybe I'm wrong, but I know too many smart women in my life that they're definitely going to see through that the moment it goes out there. But who knows? So that was ridiculousness number one.
For sure. And I think that is a new strategy that's being used, period. Because I saw it on social media a lot too from different MPs on the Liberal side saying, Pierre doesn't perform well with women voters. He's not going to win. So I would not be surprised if that was also a little bit of strategy from both parties as well, to keep trying to paint him as being unreliable and women hate him. So
yeah. And it's funny because like, I think that if they do that, if they try and paint him as women don't like him, maybe there's some voters that will fall for that. But I think what you'll actually do is you'll actually get out more Conservative vote, because they'll be like, oh crap, like they're campaigning against us. We might not secure our win. We need to get out there and vote. So it might actually work against them in that way. And then you might also get a lot of like female Conservatives out there actively campaigning against that by no request of the Conservative Party, just on their own volition, because they feel inappropriately labeled or attached to a party that they don't agree with. So it's also kind of like paternal and patronizing too to women, to be like, it's kind of what Jennifer L talks about too, when she's like, yeah, everybody tells us that the Indigenous people have to vote Liberal, and if you don't, you're not a good Indigenous person. And it's the same kind of rhetoric, right? Women need to vote Liberal or NDP, or else you're a terrible person. And that never goes well. Nobody likes that. So I don't think it's a good strategy personally.
I mean, one president in the States won on that promise. He said, if you don't vote for me, then you ain't black. And he won. So
yeah. But we also know that election has some validity questions around it. And
Reg is going there.
We won't go there.
Reg is going there.
Got to get those mail-in ballots,
Oh, baby. We love the mail-in ballots. Obviously, I'm saying that obviously in jest and all and joking. But I agree. It never does go well. And people are also getting really tired of the virtue signaling in general. Like that's starting to get exhausted. So I would agree that I think this whole, trying to pin a group against a politician, I don't think is going to work. And as well, I'll be honest, I think, because this, again, elections are won based on how bad someone wants it, right? Or how bad the other side wants it. And I think there's going to be more people who want Trudeau out of office than people who are passionate about keeping Trudeau in office. And I think that's essentially what's going to win it at the end of the day as well.
Yeah. And it's so true. And it's exactly what my old poli-sci profs told me in my undergrad. It was basically elections in Canada very rarely, almost never, are won based off of people liking the new coming candidate. It's always almost a loss that some candidate has lost to the new candidate, meaning that exactly what you said, people are just angry, they're fed up, and they're voting out somebody. They're not voting in somebody. This one I think will be interesting because I think you're getting a bit of both. You're getting that, like, we experienced it when we went in person to go listen to Pierre. There was a sense of outrage and anger and disgust, and then at the same time weirdly like hope and inspiration. So it's you're going to get both, and I think that's really going to drive the vote is really both of those emotions, because they're both strong emotions. Nobody's really wishy-washy about Pierre. That's what I'm noticing. You either love him, hate him, or you hate Trudeau more. So
the three options.
Yeah, the three options, and nobody gives a crap at NP. Like everybody's seeing through him. But it's funny though. Some of the things that are being said right now in the media, though, I'm shaking my head, and even we're seeing it in our local politics. So Tim Houston is the Premier of Nova Scotia, and we've talked ad nauseum on him, and it's funny because I actually think he's doing a pretty good job. He's doing a decent job in what he's put forward, and I get to see kind of the handiwork of his healthcare reforms, and so I'm a fan. I think he needs a new media person, though. My goodness, he got up there in front of the media, and in Nova Scotia, Power is a private entity that's regulated by the province, and so basically back in, it was like the late 80s, early 90s. The province said, we need some money. How are we going to get some money? Why don't we sell off this Crown Corporation? That's probably not a bad idea. And they sold off Nova Scotia Power, a public entity, to a private corporation, Mera. And so now fast forward in the future, power rates are expensive, and we have the power through Utilities and Review Board to actually regulate what's acceptable for power rate increases. And what's happened is people are feeling the pinch. They're saying, it's hard. It's a really difficult time right now. We need some reductions in our power costs. And Tim got up in front of the media and he said, I wish that Emera would be more empathetic to Nova Scotians. I wish they'd have more empathy. And the NDP leader for Nova Scotia gets up there and says, that's a load of BS. We shouldn't be wishing that Emera, a private company whose business is business and they only answer the shareholders, why are we wishing for them to be empathetic? That's dumb. We should be legislating better, and Tim Houston has that power. So go suck it, Tim. And that's what she's basically said in nicer terms, obviously. But it was hilarious. And I was like, she's right. She was out for blood, but she was totally right. And I'm like, Tim, man, you're making it hard to cheer for your team. You're pulling a Leafs move right now. But I guess they're both blue. But anyway, it was one of those things where I was like, man, you gotta do better here. You're in the public eye. You're on camera, and if you want a second term and you want to be the longest running premier in Nova Scotia, you gotta step up your game a bit. But just funny.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was an interesting scenario where, again, I was surprised that an NDP leader was the one who was talking business sense, which was new for me. That was kind of funny to watch, if I'm being honest. So that was kind of, we covered it on our TikTok today of just kind of the general story, what happened there. And it was just kind of funny to kind of go through the progression of what took place. And just Houston looked tired. He looked haggard, and he was like, why can't they just understand that people are struggling? And, but he did go on to say that, like, yeah, I'm not impressed with their request on this, and we will most likely not be granting it. We want to see what other else that we know personally that they can cover this themselves, and that's what they're going to do. So it was exactly, in some ways, if you clip out that part, it really did sound terrible, and it was a bad thing to say from a comms perspective. But the overall message I did agree with, and I was like, yeah, they can figure it out.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, like, I definitely, and this is why I still have support for Tim, is that I do agree with what he was saying. It's just, he's had too many of these moments where if you just take that sentence out and you throw it out there to social media, it's so bad. And it's like, it started out with the minimum wage thing. It was the same thing with Cape Breton when they had the massive amount of snowfall. I know what he was trying to say. You know, he was saying that they don't need to use the Emergency Measures Act because they or call an emergency, state of emergency, sorry, not Emergency Measures Act, but call a state of emergency because we're sending stuff anyway. And just, I get the gist of what you're saying, sir. Say it better though, because you're getting roasted out here. But speaking of people getting roasted though, Vasi though, oh my goodness, I am such a fan now. She is wild and I love it. Probably my favorite reporter now.
Yeah, she's doing a good job with what she's doing on Power Play over there on CTV. On anyone who doesn't know what Reg is referring to, obviously Vashi for CTV has been having a lot of these politicians on and have just questioning them, grilling them on the rhetoric that they're putting out there, and really putting them to the test on all political stripes. I think it's been really interesting, and it's really encouraging to see from a mainstream perspective that somebody actually has got some intestinal fortitude and being able to really call these politicians to account. Because let's be honest, obviously in a perfect world, we know the media is transitioning. We know people are moving further away from mainstream and going to more independent sources. But the issue is that we're running into is a lot of these politicians aren't given the podcast like us the time of day. But they'll give the time of day to CTV. They'll give the time of day to CBC. So it is nice to see somebody in there who is going to get that interview with them and actually push them on some of this stuff and the BS that they're putting out there, which I think is really cool and really good. And I've only kind of been put onto her for the past 6 months or so, kind of been watching quietly in the background, seeing what she's doing, and she's really been improving. I find just really as things get crazier that she's really settling things down, really cutting through the BS and trying to get down to the truth of what's actually being done and being said. And so I was surprised though with how much other Canadians are feeling the same way, because that video is over 100K now. Which I was like, dang. And all the comments are just everyone feeling the same way. It's just almost like a breath of fresh air for a lot of people.
It is. It is a breath of authenticity, right? We're tired of the performative show that's been put on by our media where they're just dancing around the politicians as if they're on a pedestal or they're some kind of demigod. We're tired of that. They're human beings. We want them to be held accountable. We want them to be held to the same standard that we are. And finally, you have a reporter that's actually doing that and calling them on their BS, calling them on their political, positioning and strategies and all these movements that they're trying to maneuver around questions. And she's like, no, actually, I loved when she was talking to Steve. I'm trying to remember his last name. McKinnon. Thank you. So when she was talking to Steve McKinnon and he's like, but the Conservatives, she's like, I'm not condoning the Conservatives. She's like, we can set that over here in the parking lot. I'm not talking to the Conservatives. I'm talking to you right now. And we're going to focus on you and your party. And he was just like, oh. And then he's like, oh, well, we just can't, put this on the same playing field. And she's like, it's exactly the same playing field. And that's exactly what we're doing. Let's keep going. You know what I mean? It was great. And I was like, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And she did that to him. She did that to Jagmeet. And she did that to Conservatives. Like, yeah. It was great.
Yeah. And the one thing I did, it really, again, we all know what these liberals are doing. We all know that this party is corrupt to its core at the moment. And what really upset me about that is when Vashi really put him on the spot and really put the fire on him, he was very quick to try and make her the villain.
Oh, yeah.
He was like, you can't both sides this. This is not appropriate to both sides this. And I was just like, wow. To then turn around and do that to the reporter, do the exact same thing you criticized Polyev of doing, and denouncing what Polyev does is wild to me. As soon as they don't go with your narrative, they become the villain. Yeah, interesting how that happens.
Well, it's exactly what we were talking about the other day. It's the liberals are actually now starting to play from the same playbook as the Conservatives, while condemning exactly what the Conservatives are doing and then doing it themselves. So this is the hypocrisy of it, right? He gets on there and exactly what you said, you can't both sides this, you're the villain. Like, how dare you ask me this kind of question, and trying to make trying to make her out to be the villain and trying to put the spotlight back on the media and take it off himself. And every time Pierre does that, they're like, look at how much he hates the media. And then for them to even go as far as start to saying like, this is not the Conservative Party of the past. This is not the Conservative Party of Diefenbaker, because as we know, Pierre likes to call out Diefenbaker in all of his speeches when he's giving them out. It's a part of the whole narrative, right? So for him to then say that, because that was Pierre's move, he said, this isn't the party of Chrétien. They're illiberal. They're not actually liberals. And for him to then come around and be like, these are radicalists. These are not conservatives. This is not your Conservative Party. He's trying the same thing because he's looking, he's going, oh, the conservatives are doing it. It's working. Maybe I should do that. Oh. And then tries the same thing. And at the same time, just, trying to condemn that party at the same time. It's laughable. It's wild. This is the wild segment. All these politicians just behaving badly.
Absolutely. And that was what was concerning. We'll get into it, Stuart, when he comes on, but that was the concerning part of the House of Commons last week, was both sides of the House literally calling the other extremists. Like, that happened in the House. And I admittedly was sitting there kind of shocked, and just like, after all that stuff happened with Poilievre getting kicked out, the first time in Canada's history that the opposition leader was kicked out of the House of Commons, which should tell you a lot. Like, I was just kind of sat there that day. I'm like, this is where our politics are at in this country. Like, we got the opposition leader kicked out. We all know that the speaker he's not fit for his job.
Very partisan.
He needs to go. And then you just have both the Liberals and Conservatives calling each other extremists. What I saw was the politics and the fighting that's happening in the streets has made it into the House of Commons and at our highest levels of government in this country. And that really discouraged me. And then it showed you that we're not on a good road for where we go from here. I don't know, but it's not positive as it keeps on this road. Yeah,
well, it's the same problem that I find. Like, you hear people like, oh, if they don't agree with you, preserve your energy and cut them out of your life, excommunicate them. There's been a lot of rhetoric in the past couple of years around this idea that, to preserve yourself, you need to stop listening to other points of view, stop engaging with other conversation that's too taxing for you. And I think that's the biggest load of BS. I think that just creates echo chambers. And as we said last week, it's a fuel for political divide, is staying in an echo chamber. And so what I'm seeing in the House of Commons right now and in these reporters' interviews, it's that kind of like, I'm not listening to the other side. I don't care. I don't have the time of day. Don't have the energy. Don't have whatever for that. They're pure evil. And therefore we don't deal with terrorists, and that's what they are. And like, that's kind of the rhetoric. It's like, no, these are your fellow Canadians. These are your colleagues. You damn well better work with them because they've been voted in. And they're not at all. So it is disappointing, and it does feel more extreme. So when they're calling each other extremists, they're kind of right. They really are. Both the Liberals and the Conservatives are right. It is extreme now. And I definitely think that this is it's an interesting turning point for our political system. And I wonder how the Conservatives are going to try and reunify the country after this mess, because it's only going to get uglier as we get closer and closer to that election. And that's all I'll say about that whole mess in the House of Commons, because I know we got lots more to say with Scott. Or Stuart. Sorry, Stuart.
There's so much I want to say about it, but we'll leave it for him, because I think he'll bring a really interesting perspective on it, just being a reporter and being on the Hill, and
exactly,
just all the stuff he's been seeing. I think it'll be a very interesting conversation. The one thing I do want to talk about, I know we discussed it over text, that was like, see how it's feeling. There's a couple tweets I came across before we came on the show today, and I think is really interesting to cover. We got Mr. Doug Ford and Justin Trudeau, both today referring and talking about what's happening with Palestine and Israel. Doug Ford, I thought was interesting, he went on to say that he was talking, people are protesting, doing their thing. He says we need to remove these people. These universities have to make a move, and calls the protest disturbing, and which I thought was interesting rhetoric, and we'll show the video here.
And I wish those people in the parks, at the universities could hear your story, that we need to remove those people. These universities have to make a move. It's so disturbing. When I see these protests, yeah, we live in a democracy. Everyone's allowed to protest peacefully, and that's what I mean, peacefully. The hatred I have seen on these protests, I've never seen before in my entire 60 years, not quite 59 years, of living here in Toronto. We're here, you want to be here in Ontario, you live in peace and love. That's what we encourage all the time, is making sure we respect every single culture, no matter where you're from. No matter if you're from Palestine, or if you're from Israel, or you're anywhere else. If you live peacefully, that's what we expect here. You don't come to Ontario, no matter what culture you are, and stir things up. As simple as that.
What I thought was interesting, kind of seeing a premier come out and really go hard on these protests, I thought was interesting. Then Trudeau came out today and said, this is what Trudeau said, I thought was very bold on his part. So I'm like curious of what's happening with this crew behind the scenes. In a country like Canada, it should be, and it must be, safe to declare oneself a Zionist. Jewish or not, Zionism is not a dirty word or something anyone should be targeted for agreeing with. It is the belief at its simplest that Jewish people, like all people, have a right to determine their own future. And I was like, for him to come out, you're right. I was like, for him to come out on that Zionist stuff, I was like, it's one thing to be like, hey, like, we need to like protect and watch out and say no to anti-Semitism. But him to come out as far as saying the Zionist stuff, I was like, I know that is I'll give him credit. Like that's a huge statement to make. And as much as I hate the guy, I got to give credit on that one. It was a ballsy move.
Do you know what I think? I think the people that are behind Jagmeet Singh right now are throwing a party that he's put out a comment like that, because you know what that's going to do. That's going to drive the left directly from the liberals to the NDP. So they're having a great day that tweet came out. And I think it's showing this prime minister just starting to crack. Like, I know we've seen instances of it before where he was in front of the reporters and they were asking him about his security detail, and then he was being grilled when he was making a housing announcement. And there's been so many instances where you just see him just like, you know, the smile starts to like get a little bit creepier and his eye starts twitching and you can see the strain. And then he'll make comments like, you know, we're going to do it or else, or they better be careful what they wish for. Like, you know, this weird, forceful, threatening, just completely dictatorish language that's coming out of his face. I'm like, oh, he's about ready to crack. He's at the end of his wits. And I mean, he's only a human being, right? I get it. You've got your wife left you and wrote a scandalous book about it, and everybody's talking about the intimate details of your life. Then you've got like people flying F you with your name under it all across the provinces and across the country. It's like, how could that not affect you as a person? You'd literally have to be a psychopath to not let it affect you. And as much as I dislike Justin Trudeau, he's not a psychopath, because you can see it. It's wearing on him, and it's creating some interesting things. So I'm wondering if this tweet was just frustration just rearing its head. And and then you get something like that. And I know, like I said, the NDP are probably just there, just like having cake, popping the champagne. Like, this is the kind of crap we need to sway the left away from the liberals and onto our side.
Yeah, absolutely. And it has been interesting to see the NDP make those moves when it comes to this whole Palestine-Israel issue. And just to see the division that something not in our country has taken place and caused such a divide in our country has been and not just happened, not just affected a divide in terms of a cultural perspective with people on the ground, but in the legislatures in the country, in the House of Commons in the country. The divide is wild of how much it's been driving that wedge, and rightfully so. We talked about on the show where just people who are from here are just like, can we like just bring people together and just shut out the outside noise? Like, this is crazy. That's not our problem. Like, we need to focus on fixing our issues here. And then they obviously get demonized for even thinking that as an idea. And so it's just like, oof, I don't know where this goes. I know it has, on our campuses up here, we haven't seen the craziness that we've seen in the States, but we're always just a little step behind, but before things really take off here. And we'll see where this all goes. But I just know that the politicians have just they've not learned what their messaging is going to be on this. They haven't made a really strong point or a point of emphasis or been clear in their stance on how they're going to approach this. It's been wishy-washy throughout it all, which has created even more and more of a divide in the country as well.
Yeah, and the funny thing that I think too with this particular protest is that we now are seeing people camping out on these university campuses, and they're like, we're occupying this space and this territory in the name of Palestine. And the big thing that I think is so funny is because when the truckers went to Ottawa, what was the big thing that they said that made it different than any other protest? They're like, they were occupying Ottawa. They were occupying the Hill. And it's like, that's why it was so bad. And then now it's like, so now that we have people who are out there saying they're quote unquote occupying this space, does that change your tone? I don't know. You tell me. It'll be interesting to see.
Absolutely. And we'll see where this all goes. And I know like it's going to come to I'd say a violent end. Like they're going to move all these people out. They're pretty clear. They are very clear that they're going to do that at some point. So we'll see where it goes. The universities have been, at least I know I saw this at U of T, University of Toronto, and I know it's been happening across other universities where there's like they're giving the encampments some literature of like what's going to happen, what they can expect, and what's coming, and then they're just going to drive this whole. Obviously, the narrative will drive like, well, they don't care about Palestine, they hate us, and that will go crazy, and then obviously the divide in the Ontario legislature with the Kifas is only gotten worse since.
Exactly,
and that's just like, woof. We'll see how this goes, but we'll end it there because we have Stuart Benson on the line. All right, we are super excited to have Stuart Benson on with us, reporter for The Hill Times, and someone who's been in the journalism game for quite some time. We figured it'd be good to have someone who's in the mix up there in Ottawa, on the Hill, seeing what's going on right here on the show with us. We're grateful to have you on with have you on with us, Stuart. How are you holding up?
I'm pretty good. Thanks for having me. It's actually, I think I'm coming up on 2 years specifically on the Hill this month, and then I think it was like 2 years before that up in Wakefield during most of the pandemic. So that was always interesting. But I'm very happy to be here. You got me on a very exciting news day, and also quite a fairly exciting news week, as we've seen the House of Commons.
Absolutely. Well, I just want to I'm curious, mainly from my own perspectives, how long have you been in the game for now?
This will be about 4 years, and then I guess kind of 6, because when I was at Algonquin for the journalism program, like part of the program is running the paper and the student magazine. So I kind of count that. I'll say like 6 years. Like we were doing stories, and it's like if you had to do a correction on your story, that's an F on your mark. So it's like we took that pretty seriously.
I would have gotten some Fs on this already.
At the beginning, there were a couple, but they were a little bit lenient, so they front loaded them, so you could at least afford to get a few of them for the odd misspelling in the name.
So there you go. Well, we love to see it, and we were excited to meet you at the CSFN in Ottawa just last month. So it was great to kind of build that relationship and have you on and do this. And so obviously we were watching here from Halifax, all the chaos happening on the Hill last week. Obviously for the first time, you definitely correct me if I'm wrong on this. I think last week was the first time we saw the opposition leader ever get kicked out of the House of Commons in our history. Is that correct?
Yeah, I did a lot of looking around. I forget what it's called, but they don't keep that record of whether or not an opposition leader has ever been kicked out. So like when you ask the Library of Parliament, they just don't have that. But as far as I know, it's the first time in federal politics that it's happened, at least that I could dig up. I think it may have happened in a provincial legislature at one point, but other than that, the closest thing you can get to is when Jagmeet Singh was named and removed. I think that was 2020, maybe. when he called, I think it was Elaine Therian, he said he called him a racist over his opposition to an RCMP bill. So that's the closest thing we've come to that.
Gee, that's crazy. So what do you think is like, from our perspective, there seems to be just such an increasing level of rhetoric happening in the House. And I don't think it's any type of coincidence that it's like currently going on the way it's been going in terms of the trend we're taking.
Yeah.
What do you think was the main issue from your perspective? Is it more like Pierre just didn't let up, or is it more the fact that the speakers political stripes are showing a little too much? What do you think it was more of the issue there, or is it just an equal balance of both?
I guess it depends on if we're talking specifically that day. I think it didn't feel like one of those stunts where we've seen some of them where you could argue maybe the Conservatives went in there with a plan in mind to maybe get thrown out and then have some fairly successful fundraising campaigns afterwards. We've seen that happen. I think Raquel Dancho, when she was named and removed in 2022, they had a very successful fundraising campaign after that. That's not what it felt like, because I wasn't in the House. Shout out Journo Dale on Twitter. He was there in the House. But from when I was watching it definitely felt like this was one of those things where the shots were going back and forth between Justin Trudeau, I think he said the spineless leadership comment.
Yeah.
Over the that sort of impromptu pit stop that Polyev made to the anti-carbon tax protesters, and there was the Diagolon
Sharpie.
It was Sharpied on the inside graffiti of the door. Yeah. So in fairness, the only way Polyev would have seen that is as he's coming out of the thing, or maybe as he's going in. But either way, he was being accused of palling up to white nationalists. Even with all of the maybe kooky things that some of those guys, it turned out, may believe, there wasn't really much white nationalism that anyone could really find from those people specifically. So that's going there, being shot at Polyev from the Liberals. I think Polyev went back with his sort of, I think it was Trudeau spent half his life as a practicing racist line that he goes to. Yeah. And then it was all sort of revolving around the criticisms, some fairly, I guess you could say, extreme criticisms from the Conservatives against the drug decriminalization in BC, and that kind of got swept under the rug. So all that being said, and then you have Polyev, I should have the full quote, but he says, these wacko sort of policies from this wacko prime minister. And if you don't pay a lot of attention to the House of Commons or its rules and procedures and sort of traditions, you may be having trouble wrapping your head around why wacko is such a big deal. But that's how parliamentary democracy works. A lot of it is tradition, these sort of real, you can't call anyone a liar. A lot of times you'll hear people say that in the foyer, because it's then you can be sued for libel. In the House of Commons, you can't be sued for libel, but also you can't be called a liar. There's a lot of these weird rules. So you can't call a prime minister a wacko. There was, I think NDP House Leader Peter Julian has said the word wacko in the House of Commons, but technically wasn't calling anyone specifically a wacko. So Fergus gives him the chance to withdraw, specifically withdraw. 4 chances, I think, went to radical, then extremist, then back to extremist, blah, blah, blah. Doesn't withdraw, gets kicked out. So, yeah, I think it was just the tension in that day had get pushed up so much that no one was willing to give an inch there. Mm-hmm. Fergus wasn't willing to let him reframe, and Polyev wasn't willing to just withdraw and apologize. And when that happens, the speaker gets authority. So that's what happened there. And that was a very long-winded answer, so I'm sorry. But there's so much happening there. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just thinking, do you think that if he would have left wacko as these wacko policies from this prime minister and didn't specifically call the prime minister wacko, if he would have just called the policies wacko, do you think it would have slid? It would have gone through?
Technically, it probably should have. That's should have been the ruling. But that's the thing is the speaker has so much like authority and like once they make that decision, that's how it goes. So like if Poilievre had just said I withdraw, that would have been it. But like I think Poilievre was not good. Like he had taken enough that day that he wasn't going to take no more.
Right.
Yeah.
And I was kind of. I thought this was interesting. I don't know how much sports you follow. This is kind of how I viewed it. Even the week leading up to that happening was when basketball or hockey, when a team feels like they're being slighted by the refs, they'll go into the media and say, "Wow, these guys really needed to get it together," and they'll criticize the officiating without getting sued or without getting fined, but they'll put it out there, and then the next game you'll see, oh, things shift a little bit to the team's favor. What I saw, I think it was the week before, where there was another situation erupted in the House of Commons with Poilievre again pushing the boundary lines. I can't remember exactly what happened, but I remember that happening. And I remember a lot of Liberals coming out and saying, wow, Greg Ferguson needs to really do his job. He needs to figure some things out. He really needs to like make sure he keeps decorum in the House of Commons. Then there was like either the next day or like two question periods later, this then happens. And I really found it interesting. This is something I picked up on as a small detail, was as soon as Poilievre makes a statement saying, wacko policies from this wacko prime minister, immediately Craig Fergus is like, no. And it was that moment I was like, oh, the voices from his liberal side have been playing in his head and he wanted to make a point is what I gathered. I don't know if you saw that at all.
Yeah. So for your analogy, it's that sort of makeup penalty where they sort of think that they screwed up before. So now they got to throw another penalty to sort of even the playing field. I can see that. There's definitely I've definitely kind of people have made that accusation before where but I think it's more to do with the quality of the parliament. And I think I was talking to I might be scooping myself for the paper, but I was talking to some pundits, and like the sort of general thought is like usually if a parliament got to this level of dysfunction, the remedy is an election and you get a new parliament. It's exactly. The issue is to defend Fergus here, and I don't think he had the most fertile ground and good faith reception when he came in, and he was sort of getting pummeled almost immediately. But like I don't think it's entirely his fault. I think this is the quality of the House of Commons and the dysfunction of the House of Commons. And when you say Speaker Fergus should resign, the follow-up question is who would be able to do it and who would be willing to do it in this sort of situation. And in any other past times where things got even close to this bad, there was an election. And that's it. Not whether or not it was directly because of how bad it got in the House of Commons, but usually that's the natural remedy, is if it gets this dysfunctional, an election gets called. But because of
the wackos, because of the wackos that we have that have, shaken hands and created deals, we have this.
Well, yes, what I would say is because of the Spy and Comps agreement, we have this. But some people could say that those are the same thing, but I won't.
Well, this is going to be, I'd say, this is going to put you in a bit of an unfair position, so I apologize in advance. But just playing the comparison game, the last speaker, Anthony Rota, do you think he would have dealt with this differently and probably better than Greg did?
That's a really tough question.
I'm sorry.
No, I know, but it's not even like to like say like one is better than the other, but it's like it's just the same thing I just said. If the unfortunate Hunka affair hadn't happened and Rota was still speaker, would Rota be doing much better? I don't know, because it's like, look at because the one suggestion that comes up a lot as someone who could do it is Chris D'Entremont. But like he has his own like difficulties trying to do it, and like he would be maybe seen as like a better like person to do it. But the other suggestion is like when you look at like down south, once that blood is in the water, and this would be the second taste of that blood, even your own guy might not seem like he's doing the job right, even if he's doing it fairly, because things have just gotten so toxic that anytime he does judge fairly in favor of the Liberals, it's going to feel like a betrayal almost. And I'm not saying they're all going to feel that way, but I'm sure it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And you go for it, Reg.
I was just going to say cue Toxic by Britney Spears right now.
But that's go for it. No, that's what it is. It's the toxicity has gotten to a boiling point, and the regular release valve is usually an election. And I don't know if we can do that. And then there's also just the perverse incentives where the Conservatives I think they did a fundraiser off it. I don't know how much they brought in. Liberals are now saying that the fundraising email they sent out after Poilievre was kicked out was their like most successful fundraising email of the year. So, and like to like say pox on all their houses, when Jagmeet Singh was kicked out, they put out a fundraising email very quickly after. So it's like this is the sort of the environment they're in, and the perverse incentives to not lower the temperature.
And then as well as you said, the supply and confidence deal doesn't help, because we saw even, I think, leading in, or sorry, it would have been you would know this, the presser right after the QP before the QP the next day, when Jagmeet just said, yeah, we're going to sign off on this budget. And like the last hope that people had, maybe we could trigger an election after all this, was poof, gone, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's like I don't see the like, it's kind of the Conservatives being damned by their own success almost. They're doing so well in the polls. They're doing so well in fundraising. Why in the world would the NDP or Liberals want to call an election anytime soon?
Exactly. So,
welcome to the game.
Yeah,
I guess.
It's that catch-22.
Absolutely. Before we move on, Reg, do you have any more questions before we move on to the next topic?
No, because I want the next topic now. This one is too good.
Kick us off, Reg.
No, I want Stuart to kick us off here. Tell us about the foreign interference.
Okay, so foreign interference inquiry after the longest road. I think this is since, like, including the David Johnson and his appointment as special rapporteur and his initial report. We're finally at, I think, ironically, we've just kind of caught back up to what was sort of in the Johnston report, but not to say that, but that's not to say that it was pointless. Like, this is in a way that people have started to consume, understand, and also, most importantly, view as legitimate. Where even though there's not a lot of stuff that contradicts or is hugely new in this next report, it's seen as legitimate because it was done way more out in the open, rather than Johnston reviewing the documents on his own, sort of in his office, and saying, kind of like, you'll just have to trust me. So the findings were basically that foreign interference did occur, primarily by China. There were sort of kind of mentions of Russia, India, and Pakistan, though a lot of that stuff is more focused on transnational repression of the diaspora in Canada, rather than sort of interfering with elections specifically. I did feel a pang of like national insults with the Russian part, where it's sort of that because they're already doing their interference in America, they just know that there's going to be enough cross-pollination into Canada that they sort of get us as a twofer, which I don't really like to hear that so much, but it is true. So I guess, like, is there anything specific? I don't know how much of because there is quite a bit in there, and the hearings covered a lot. So I guess, is there anything specific that you were like really interested to know what she thought of?
Yeah, let's do this. Let's act like a show for a second. I'll frame this up a little bit before we get into it. So that's all me. But yeah, so we have the foreign interference inquiry, and you know, you said there's that report by Johnston that kind of was done within a black box. Essentially, we didn't really know what was going on, what he was considering, and then we had the inquiry that came about, and there were some people getting grilled over it, people that were questioned on it.
About 66 witnesses from like elections officials to the prime minister, cabinet officials, David Vigneault for CSIS, the whole gambit. It was like 3 weeks a bit, maybe actual 10 days of hearings, but it got real in depth.
Exactly. And that's exactly why we're having you on the show. We have the exact numbers. Boom, right there. We love to see it. And so the question then we then are posing is like, yeah, we learned from a lot of this inquiry is that, yes, there was some interference, but it really didn't take place within the general election. It was mainly kind of in the nomination races and stuff like that.
Well, there was the one with the Kenny Chew's election that was during the actual federal election, and that was seen as sort of that sort of disinformation campaign that was targeting him, following a lot of the stuff that came out, or the criticism of their platform and how many times they mentioned China and the disinformation about what that would actually mean and how So that was in the actual election, though. She didn't really come to a lot of conclusions about what the actual impact of that was.
Right. And so, but generally kind of what we understood from the inquiry is that like it had very minimal impact on our general elections. There was, depending on the race, depending on the riding, there was significant impact in the nomination races. But the question that people are generally having is, well, there's been a lot, it's been very, very loud in terms of how much has been going on. And the Liberals are just like, well, there's not really that much going on. And like, it's like, we still have our integrity, and the Conservatives are still driving this point home of like, no, like this is terrible. This election interference. We got to get on top of this. So that kind of leaves us with, where do we go from here? Like what's going to happen? And then the Liberals come out today and saying, we're going to introduce a registry. And I think that's where I direct my questioning right now is, what is this registry? What was this announcement about, this foreign interference registry of sorts? What are the details of this?
So I'm still going through it myself. There was a technical briefing. It's quite a big bill, and like you can't really get through a lot of it in like the 20-25 minutes they give you, but it's like the foreign interference registry is basically what people have been looking for. If you're doing anything on behalf of a foreign government that would influence any sort of government or public life, or just it's what people were wanting, and you'd have to register. If you failed to do so, you would face $5 million in fines or up to 5 years in prison. It also creates foreign influence as an actual offense that can be like charged, which was one of the big issues with dealing with foreign interference up until now, because what would you actually charge them with? It's a lot of it was very intangible. So this makes it sort of, I think the words they say, to engage in, I need to get the specific wording, surreptitious or deceptive conduct to influence a political or governmental process. And when we asked, we can't cite anyone, but like we were told that this would include nomination processes. Right. So the stuff that was suggested in the Han-Dong nomination, where you're hiring buses, and the thing with the buses would be hard to charge for, but the allegations of them providing falsified documentation or threatening their visas if they didn't vote a certain way, that would be a chargeable offense. You could face up to life in prison for that.
Well, wouldn't it be fraud and extortion, basically? I would think.
Yeah, I get it. Well, it's just the way that I think. Again, these are some questions where you'd have to get a lawyer on here, but I guess it's just because I get that is a good question, but it's more like proving it, and it like you have. So it's creating those sort of things. There's some stuff on making offense for sabotage, which was interesting. So my first thought was like, if you're building like a bomb to blow up some rail line or something, which I assume that would be included. But also one of the suggestions they used were like a USB drive with some malware on it that you've been told to upload, and that would also carry like some very serious like penalties and offenses. So there's that, and then they've expanded how CSIS can share information, how it can like. So I think it can also now share information with non-federal like bodies. So I think that would also include like the Conservative Party. So if they had something that they wanted to alert the Conservatives to, they could now do that without having to go through the federal government and then have the federal government decide what to share. So it's a lot of stuff that people have been calling for. I mean, you'll have to dig through it and listen to a lot smarter people react to this than me. This is my first like brush at it, but it's something. The problem is the timing of it, because just right now, if all goes well, I don't know what the fastest it could get through the legislature, but I think it's like an 18-month delay, and then the implementation. So it's the likelihood of a foreign agents registry being ready for, I think it's October 2024, somewhere in there is when the election would have to be. I would not hold your breath for it to be ready. Miracle, it could happen. I'm not saying it couldn't, but that doesn't seem likely.
So our understanding is be ready for some more fun in the next election.
Oh, yeah, this is a big juicy bill, and there's a lot of fun, shall we say, that both in the House of Commons when they're debating it, and specifically a committee that could be had over this.
Right, but do you think this is something though that would actually unite the parties, where they both would want this, such that you'd see this be expedited a little bit more than other things, where there would be roadblocks kind of removed because the Conservatives want this and the Liberals are the ones proposing it?
Mm-hmm. I think no surprises here. Maybe it is surprising to you. The NDP have come out and said that they would support, that they're generally in support of this. I don't think that they have read much more through it than I have. Not to say that they don't have some speedy readers on their staff, but like it's a lot. So that's what I'm saying. First brush, good faith, everyone acting in good faith. I could see the bloc, the Conservatives supporting it as well. Again, with a lot of these things, devil's in the details and the implementation. And I think the one hang up could be the way that they're setting up the foreign interference registry and the new commissioner that they're proposing that would regulate it. So I've seen enough things where they've proposed some sort of commission with a new independent commissioner, and that gets real messy. So a lot of things could happen, but this seems like the thing that people have wanted.
Right. Mm-hmm. And that's a positive thing. And what I could see happening, because as you said, you've only had so much time to go through this bill. But as you said, the devil is in the details. I'm curious if at any point there is something that's like, that doesn't, like the Liberals kind of throw something in there.
A carbon tax.
So yeah, I can imagine. That kind of like really kind of throws the alarm bells up for the Conservatives, and they come out and be like, no, we're not for this. And this is 8-10 months down the road. And the Conservatives like, no, we're going to kibosh this here and now.
And that's when you say that is because I was sort of in the mind frame of the Foreign Influence Transparency and Accountability Act, which was what would bring in the registry. But this is also a bit of an omnibus bill, because that Foreign Influence and Transparency and Accountability Act is part 4 of 4. So there's 3 other parts to it, and there's amendments to the CSIS Act, Security of Information Act, and the Canada Evidence Act. So there's a lot of things that the Conservatives could probably just reasonably have objections to in there, depending on how they're worded and what kind of powers that they give to CSIS or police and like law enforcement agencies or the government itself. So nothing sure.
Yeah, right, that makes sense. I could see potentially it could end up being a political play to make the Conservatives look bad before an election as well. Potentially.
Well, I don't know if it could be used as a political play to make the Conservatives look bad. I think the only way that could happen is if the Conservatives do something silly. I think that if they, I was just thinking the way I would see it is it's a reason for the Liberals to say you need to re-elect us, because we need to get this done.
So that's a question.
Which is a lot of the things. Mm-hmm. Sorry. Go. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm just wondering. This is a gap in my understanding of our political system. But if there is a bill in progress, let's say it's had multiple readings, it's heading towards the Senate, and we have an election, does that bill effectively die with the election, or can that continue on after the election and through?
No,
the
you're right.
election?
It would die on the order paper, but I mean, like, if they were able to get the legislation through, and they do have different parliamentary procedure tricks that they can use on certain pieces of important legislation to push them through and get them to committee and all that. And there is foreseeably possibly enough time to do that between now and 2 Octobers from now. But if they were able to do that, and it's between when it gets royal assent and implementation, that would be an argument for re-election. But you're right, if it dies on the order paper, that argument doesn't hold water as much.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess that was mainly my point. I guess when I said earlier is like making the Conservatives look bad. Like I'm just thinking, you know, there is something that they raise alarm bells about, but the Liberals can then, because we've seen this happen already, where we see MPs literally lying on Twitter at this point, where there's like, well, Conservatives don't care about protecting our elections, so.
I haven't seen that yet.
You know, but
yeah.
I'm not putting it past them. I know you can't say nothing about it, but I'm obviously, as someone who's like, I can't say I'm unbiased, but I could see something like that potentially happening just because of what I've seen on other behaviors with other bills.
Yes.
But like, you know, we'll see what happens. I would like to believe that this is all in good faith. However, after the eruption last week, after where our politics have been at, good faith just seems to be in short supply these days.
Yeah.
So,
well, they need to call up Tim Houston and ask him to tell them to be a little more empathetic.
That's Reg for you, dropping jokes with our guest that has no idea the context of it.
It's for the listeners.
Or is that
man.
from?
It's for the
Okay,
listeners.
no worries. I was wondering. I'm like, did he say that recently? Yeah. Okay. I'll let the listeners enjoy that. No worries.
But awesome. You were gonna say something and then got cut off.
Well, yeah, no, I think it could, like the legislation itself and putting it forward seems like it's in good faith. You can argue about why did it take you so long? Why didn't we have this before? I read some reporting that they were saying that they had this legislative package for a while. So you could argue that maybe the timing is a little bit sketchy, but I think that they are doing it in good faith. It's whether or not they continue to try and get it through in good faith, and the way they argue it is in good faith. Because, I mean, if you say that you've seen Liberals already using it to argue that Conservatives don't care about protecting elections, when I don't even think the Conservatives have reacted to it yet, or at least I haven't got it through in my inbox, I'll believe you. Because
So yeah, sorry, I'll clarify. That's not what I was trying to say. I was talking about like other issues with other bills in the past, like things that aren't related to this, but like just the way Conservatives have voted on, you know, for example, Jagmeet's using this right now. Conservatives don't care about national pharmacare. They keep voting against it. That's kind of
that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's kind of more so what I mean.
It's definitely something that could happen, or like if the Conservatives say, well, we don't like this sort of thing, and we think maybe, or if any sort of delay, or the Conservatives aren't willing to move as fast as the Liberals want to, could be then jujitsu'd into, oh, well, you're not serious about taking immediate action to protect our elections. So that's the thing that could happen. So that's, though we don't want to impugn anyone's intentions, I am hoping, and I will from here assume good faith, and that's what I always do until proven wrong.
And that's why we love you as a journalist, sir, or as a reporter. Sorry,
yes.
As a reporter.
I'll take both.
There you go. I just know there's a huge distinction between journalist and reporter. I
think I more see it as like journalist is the umbrella term. Like reporter is like, that's just sort of, I'm a grunt. I go out and they go say, what are they saying? And I report back. And then there's columnists, and then there's op-ed people. So I think journalist is more just, that's the friendly catch-all.
Oh, okay, that's good to know. Good thing I'm not offending anybody. That's the one thing I learned, obviously, because we're not journalists in the slightest, but it was really interesting being in the press room at the conference and seeing you guys do your work. Admittedly, me and Reg both have so much respect for what you guys do, because it's a lot. It's really heady work.
Well, it's interesting because it's like my whole thing is journalism is sort of, I think I'm stealing this quote, but I can never remember it. But journalism is in like an act you commit rather than something you are. It's like being a criminal. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't think like if you go out and you like steal a car, and then 5 years later you haven't stolen the car for 5 years, you're not a car thief. You're just you stole a car one time. So it's like journalism is a thing you do constantly. So it's like, and with the way that sort of the like mainstream sort of institutional media and sort of online stuff is sort of, there's that barrier is getting very thin. So it is very much about how you conduct yourself. Like Paul Wells, very, very good journalist. I think he does like sometimes a little bit more like opinion-y stuff. He gives his like editorializes a little bit, but like he's very successful and he's all on Substack. And then, I mean, you have a lot of like MSNBC hosts who functionally do nothing different than what you're doing right now. Yeah. Other than they have a little bit more budget and some guys, like probably a team of dudes and ladies and whoever else working the ones and twos in the background. But like, as far as if the medium is the message, then I don't even know what the medium is anymore. It's whatever you want it to be.
True.
So
shout out Marshall McLuhan. There you go. Reg, do you have any final questions before we end off here?
No, I think you covered it. I think that my biggest thing was what happens if this doesn't get passed and how are they going to use it and what are we expecting basically from this. And I think we kind of really touched on a lot of that. So I really appreciate you, Stuart, being in the virtual studio with us, because it really did add a lot to this conversation. And we really appreciate you taking that time.
Thanks for having me. I hope I could explain some things. There's probably so much I've left out, and probably some of your listeners screaming at me for not getting to something, but I did my best.
They'll scream at us either way.
Yeah, exactly. No, and we
get in the comments.
Yeah, we'll find where the comments are. We'll send them you in the DMs and let you know, well, we missed this one.
Fantastic. I always love hearing from listeners and readers.
There we go. Well, we appreciate you taking the time out. It really means the world. And
thanks for having me.
No problem. And is there you got 30 seconds, or anything you want to plug before we leave?
Left Hand Stew on Twitter. That's me on Twitch as well. And I'm trying to do some YouTube interviews. So we try to keep the brand consistent across all platforms. So give me a follow somewhere.
Let's go Left Hand Stew.
Your platform of choices.
Like and subscribe.
And that's because I'm left-handed. You're supposed to say it like Cool Hand Luke. I want to get that on the record.
Cool Hand Luke, Left Hand Stew. I love that. I love that for you, dude.
Okay.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. We have to have you on again at some point when something else big happens. Really appreciate it, dude.
Would love to. I'm sure there'll be something.
Absolutely.
All right. Talk to you later, guys.
See ya.
Well, that was great. Stuart's awesome. Really appreciated his time and really kind of painting the picture of what's happening, things that he's covering over there in Ottawa and what's happening on the Hill. But we got to get into this departure tax. So, Reg, so what happened this past week was there was a tweet that's kind of been floating around and by TD Leaker. And essentially what it was talking about was that Canada is potentially, Trudeau's government is dabbling in the idea of expanding this departure tax that already currently exists. And this is what the tweet says, Canada proposes $25,000 departure penalty and increased taxes to curb immigration crisis. In a bid to address a growing immigration crisis, the Canadian government under Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is reportedly discussing significant measures to deter citizens from leaving the country. According to insider sources, the proposed strategy includes a $25,000 departure penalty along with a doubling of the existing departure tax for those seeking to relocate abroad. This approach aims to stem the tide of Canadians moving overseas amidst ongoing national crisis in housing, inflation, affordability, education, productivity, and climate. Yeah. So that was kind of what that is. And that's the problem with this tweet is, again, based on insider information, quote unquote, whatever that means. This tweet actually got community noted on Twitter. And no one really knows exactly how true any of this is. But what it did lead me to is learning that there's a departure tax here in the country, which I thought was crazy. So apparently, essentially what this thing is, it's on the Canadian government website.
The same with me. I didn't know that was a thing.
True. And especially as two guys who are thinking about possibly leaving if we have to.
Lag.
Yeah. We're getting wrecked. But apparently, this is the issue of the departure tax is based on the government website. It says, when you leave Canada, you are considered to have sold certain types of property, even if you have not sold them, at their fair market value, and to have immediately reacquired them for the same amount. This is called a deemed disposition, and you may have to report a capital gain on it. So the note is if the total FMV of all the property you owned when you left Canada was more than 25,000, you have to complete X amount of forms, and you are going to be taxed on it if you leave. And this is the annoying part, is the fact that it was clear on that. It doesn't matter if you sold it or not. We're going to treat you as if you sold it, and we're going to tax you whatever that value is, which could be thousands of dollars if you want to leave and you own property here. So that was crazy to me to know that we are essentially they're obviously trying to disincentivize people from moving, but when you have a government that's really causing a ruckus, they're really making sure you stay stuck here if you have ties to the country.
And the point is, it's not going to affect the rich. I mean, the rich are going to look at a $25,000 penalty and go, I don't care. Like, it's not going to affect them. Who it's going to affect is people who are like the digital nomads, the upper middle class, the people who started small businesses and who have the mobility to actually be able to pick up their business and leave. And they recognize that. They're going, uh-oh, we're actively destroying our middle class. And those individuals who've started businesses that are digital, that can move, that have the ability to pick up and leave, or people with in-demand skills, like people in the construction industry, people in the healthcare industry, people who are professionals, that they can actually pick up and move. $25,000 is a large sum to that group. So that will be a deterrent. So this is where I'm looking at this going, they're really targeting the middle class again, being like, we know we're killing you, middle class, but we don't want you to run away and still keep your money. So if you leave, we're going to take every last cent we can possibly squeeze out of you. The thing I wonder, though, is that if you leave the country, and depending, I guess it depends on what the status of the country you're going to is. Like if you're going to the States, there's good relations between Canada and the United States. They can come after you. But I'm wondering, like, if you just say, see ya, screw it, I'm not paying your tax, and you go to another country that does not share that same kind of close relationship, can they try and charge it out of you? Or is it just you're never allowed to come back to Canada again unless you pay that tax?
I mean, that's essentially, even like, I believe it or not, I don't even think Canada, regardless if you're in the States or somewhere else, they really don't have the power or the resources to come after you in another country. The only people that have the power to do that is the IRS in the States. Those are the ones that have the weight behind them to go after you. I could be wrong, but that's from my understanding as well. Like, you know, if you go back to the country, there'll be a red flag on your passport, and you're just like, okay, this guy owes taxes. Are you going to pay it up? That will happen. And if you want to ever move back to Canada, you will have a bill waiting for you when you come back. And I think that's as far as it's going to go. But that's the issue, is like, if you decide not to pay it and your whole plan is you're never coming back, then fair play. You mean, you do you. But if you ever anything comes back where it's like, yeah, I got to go back to Canada, I got to live in Canada, something happens to your family member, this, that, the other, you're going to have a hefty bill waiting for you, which sucks, which is crazy, because I'm in that boat too. I'm like, that's my visceral reaction to this is, screw you, come and get it. I'm not paying you nothing. Yeah. But if everything ever happens, you have to come back to the homeland. You could be facing some tough times.
Yeah. To me, it screams more of the fact that this is a desperate attempt to stop the brain drain and stop the talent drain that they've created. Because what they've basically done is they've created a pipeline where they're bringing in people from other parts of the world that are not in the middle class range, and they're emptying out the middle class. And so you're replacing the middle class earners with low income earners, and realizing what a crappy idea this is, and then going, well, we need to stop that flow on this end, while at the same time still continuing the onslaught of immigration. So I don't know, man. To me, it just screams desperate. It just looks sad. I know that it's speculative and it's not actually something that's in place yet. But even the fact that we have a departure tax right now, that's the part, like you said, to become aware of that. I didn't know that was a thing. So I guess the only way the only way you're leaving this country without paying a departure tax is to go in a casket, I guess.
True. We don't fully know what year it came in. We're seeing possibly somewhere in the late 90s. But it's just the fact that this is a thing is so concerning. And reality is we wouldn't have known as a thing until things got bad in our country. And that's what we've learned. You never would have known about a policy like this unless you had to leave the country. And that's kind of more people are leaving. And people are saying, what was it? I was watching CTV and they said 11% of our population is now living abroad.
Yeah.
11% of our population is living abroad now. That's crazy.
That is nuts.
So we'll see where this goes. But that was something I learned is, again, this departure tax. If you want to go and you own property, anything that's significant, they're gonna tax you on it. They're gonna tax you capital gains on it. So, and they made sure to increase the amount that they can tax you on if it's above 250. So, good luck, and we wish you well. Oh. Right on, soldier. Speaking of soldiers, we
nice segue.
We love that segue. That was not on purpose. We're here for it. But yeah, the Canadian military introduced a new logo, and people were really upset about it, rightfully so, because the logo kind of sucks. And so it was tough. Like, a lot of Twitter blew up over it. People are like, what are we paying money for? What are we doing here? And honestly, I can't blame them. Like, what was that? And it was presented at first as if it was the new rebrand of the Canadian military. Then, as distaste grew throughout the day, they walked it back, saying, well, it's only going to show on our camouflage uniforms. It's also going to be in like the bottom right corner of our presentations that we're showing off to people, this, that, the other. And everyone's like, this seems like a walk back. And it's either two things happened. One or two things happened. And Jennifer brought this up as well. Either this was a walk back and they realized how bad it got taken, or how people felt about it. Or two, their comms are just really bad and they didn't communicate properly of how this is all going to go. Either way, it's a huge loss and big L for that department in the government. And the one thing they did hold on to, they said that this was all from their internal graphic design team. They didn't do anything with outside consultants. So, hey, big plus. No outside consultants are used for this one, and you can tell. And this is the issue. So this is the thing, how I feel about it. The reason why I finally, because Reg, you get to have a monopoly on this on the show typically, because we touch on healthcare stuff and you're right on it. You know so much about it. This is the first time as a designer, I can speak to the process of what it takes to design something like this. And what I would love to know is, because it said they didn't use any outside consultants. This was all their internal graphic design team. Typically, when you're doing a large rebrand, especially for something that's iconic and something that has a lot behind it, and if you mess it up, it's going to cost a lot of money. You want to make sure you're crossing all your T's, dotting all your I's. The whole goal is you should have a design rationale that goes to your client. In this case, if you're in the graphic design team, your client is whoever's leading that team, who then has to then show this to the Canadian public. And that rationale should include your research. That rationale should include what you got inspiration from. That rationale should include why you chose what you chose. What is the significance? What is the representation? Why it goes down to the rationale should include why you chose specific tech or font, why you chose specific colors. They get really, why you even chose specific curvatures on different shapes. Mm-hmm. What would benefit right now, this whole comms issue, is releasing that design rationale. And at the very least, people can see for themselves, they can disagree with it, whatever, but at least you see the detailed rationale of how they went through this process. But if they don't show that, or worse off, that doesn't exist, then people are going to be very upset, even more so over this, that it was clearly all slapped together, as it kind of looks like. And it's just a PR nightmare for a government that really can't afford any more PR nightmares as it is. And that's kind of how I feel. Like, designs, regardless, we know it. Every time anything gets redesigned in our culture, there's always a group of people who said, this thing sucks, I hate this. There's always some type of visceral reaction to it. But this one was more than usual, which means that this thing really didn't hit well. And again, especially with how crazy things are around politics, people really believe that they are just trying to, like, the right definitely was going down this path of like, they're just trying to hurt you and hurt your soul and hurt the Canadian identity and this, that, the other, blah, blah, blah. And it just, everything around this was bad in so many ways. People were not fans, left or right. So,
yeah. I have two thoughts. I'm like over here dying because all I have going on in my head at the same time is when you're talking about design rationale, is there was a TikToker that was like, it looks like a pixelated moose taking a dump. I thought that was the best description. I was like, that's exactly what it looks like. And the second thing is, like, as ex-military, because I was a medic in the military, it's embarrassing. I look at that and I'm like, I would be embarrassed to see that on my uniform today. I know that they did make a couple changes to the uniform since I was in, and I wasn't really crazy about the changes. They made the Canadian flag like twice the size, and it kind of just looked goofy. They changed a couple different elements, and but at the same time, I was like, you know what, though, the integrity of the uniform is still there. It still looks respectable. And to me, when I look at this new logo and I look at the previous logo, and I say, this one looks like a well-respected military, and there's detail and design effort into it. This does look like a pixelated moose taking a crap. And I'm like, this does nothing for morale of the military. It doesn't inspire pride and patriotism, and doesn't make me think, yeah, I'm so proud to put on the uniform kind of thing. It's embarrassing. And so that's why there's such a visceral reaction, especially when you're talking about people who are literally seeing the most horrific things in this world. You know, they're going to war zones. They're putting their life at risk. Do you want those people like flying the pixelated moose, or do you want them actually, you know, behind the coat of arms with, you know, history behind it and thought and effort? And that to me is what kind of stuck out, because knowing people and friends that I have had that have passed away being in the military, I think it's insulting, and I think it's insulting to a national core. And so that's why I think you're getting the reaction that you're getting, is because it's so important. And there, like you said, there is so much weight behind it, that to do such a bad job and then, like you said, not release any rationale about the design, because you're like, cool, it's CAD Pat, it matches the uniform, but like, it's brutal, man. It's just, it's so brutal. That I think it's striking a chord.
Yeah, and I would agree. I'm not saying I was surprised by the reaction, but I just felt like there was like, it really made me look at it a little bit deeper, seeing how visceral the reaction was. And it goes back to what you just said, where it's like, yeah, it's supposed to symbolize the strength of a country. Like it's it symbolizes our defense. And that's why, and it just felt like it wasn't taken seriously in some people's eyes. And I would agree with that. Like, even if there was, because there's just no resemblance to what the original logo is. And again, there was no communication behind what this new logo is. Is it replacing the old one? Is it for only specific situations? None of that was communicated, which is why people are so ticked off. And I don't think they should be surprised why people went off on this so much. And the fact there's just cloud, it's so cloudy, and there's so much confusion around what we're doing with this thing. And it just shows that, again, we all know there's different arms of government and this, that, the other, but people will always just equate it to Trudeau's cabinet, and they will. And that's just naturally, they want to simplify things. That's what they'll do. And it just resembles a government that's unserious, does not care, and does not care about its constituents. And that's kind of where people were at with it, from my understanding.
Yeah, I see where people are coming at with that. I think it's unfair. It's an unfair attribution to the Trudeau government. But at the same time, I wonder, like, what is going through senior leadership's head? Like, why are they not saying we need to release this to the servicemen and women and their families and see what the reaction is? Because those are the people who ultimately should have first veto power on this kind of thing, because they are the ones who are putting themselves in harm's way for the good of our country. So I'm just like, where was the consultation? And maybe I'm primed for this too, because I'm at an evaluation conference, but you know, where was the consultation? Where was the evaluation? Who signed off on this? And why would you release it to the public before actually having somebody else who is not within the circle of the design team circle actually looking at this? I don't know. It's bad, man.
When I was reading a CBC article on it, and the big thing that they kind of hit on was the big thing the team really hit on was like, we used as little money as possible to make this a reality. Essentially was the vibe. And because of the Arrive scam and all of that, I'm sure that really was echoing in this team's ears. And I'm sure they really did to make sure to keep everything internal, make sure that they use as little resources on this as possible, which then showed that I think that's likely what killed them at the end of the day and really bit them in the butt. Was like, no, this is something you probably should have put some time into, and put a little more thought and resource into. And we're not saying put $60 million worth of it into it, but also don't put just someone's yearly salary on it either.
Yeah, but it's like if somebody redesigned the Canadian flag in Minecraft and then threw it out there and we're like, ta-da! Like, nobody would be happy about that. And I even just think about even something as trivial as sports teams. Can you imagine if they would have done this to like a sports logo? Like, the team would be done. We've already seen when teams rebrandings have, not gone well. And it's just, and that's just for something like sports, which is not going to, be life or death. This is literally, we're talking about people, like I said, laying their lives on the line. So it's just not good. Hopefully they walk it back even farther. I would like to see it disappear into oblivion and be like, haha, remember that one time? Yeah, cool. Let's never talk about it again.
Well, I'm curious, like, is it supposed to look like the country Canada? Is that what it's supposed to look like? I don't even know what's supposed to result.
I have no idea. I can't unsee the moose taking a dump. Like, that's all I can think.
That idea is taken off, like, of what this thing could look like, whether it does look like this, that, the other. And the fact that we haven't heard a thing from the team of, no, this is actually what we were aiming for. Like, they're crickets over there. Like, they haven't even gotten in front of it from that perspective either. Like, if I'm the designer on this and I see my team getting cooked over this, you best know I'm like, we got to say something. I'm sure the comms team has a say into it, obviously. But like, gee, you got to get in front of this and be like, no. This is our rationale. This is where we're going for. And this is the issue I have with it, Reg. If they're not doing that, that means it doesn't exist. And that was really concerning to me.
Yeah.
So.
Well, you know what's happening is that designer is just like, how much is the departure task again? He's getting the heck of a dodge.
See ya. Yeah, and again, this is Josh Udall, who's a design prof as well as runs his own design company. This is my perspective on it and my understanding of how this should have went and how the teams should have operated. And I'm not seeing any evidence that that's what happened. And what it's evidence of is what I teach my students not to do. And what I see evidence of is a student typically, if this was a student that brought this forward to me and then gave their perspective of it the way this team has, it indicates to me right away as a prof, there was no thought into this. And I'm actually going to be picking them apart on the lack of process of how they got to this solution. So we'll leave it at that.
Yep.
And what a time to be alive, sir. Gee, that was crazy. But what a good episode. It was great to have you virtually. I know it's not the same, especially I'm curious how viewers are going to take this, of just kind of having two guys on a screen in terms of just being split screen. But it was a good time having Stuart on and having all that jazz. It was good times.
Yeah, I'm glad to be a part of it, even though I'm a province away. So thank goodness for all the virtual tools we got out of COVID, right?
True, you're not wrong. Well, make sure to say hi to Blaine Higgs for me while you're over there, and we'll love to see you. Good luck at the rest of your conference there.
I don't know. I was there in front of the legislature today, and I have to say, like, they did a good job, like, building that when they built it. It's very, very aesthetically pleasing. I will say New Brunswick has definitely one-upped us on their legislature building. I still think Victoria takes the cake for having the nicest legislature, but New Brunswick isn't far behind. They're doing a good job. But as far as the quality of the politicians, though, I think that we have them hands down beat in droves.
No matter what they say to the media. Oh, baby. So
yeah, exactly.
Whatever it is you're doing, whether you be watching some sports,
heading to the gym,
or designing a better logo with proper rationale, Whatever it is you're doing, wherever you are, we love you. We're out. Peace.